and welcome to Day to Day 2026. My name is Dr. Zach Horton. I'm the Principal Data Scientist at the Management Performance Hub, and I'm excited to share with you my presentation, No PhD Required, A Practical Guide to AI in the Workplace. Now, before we get started into anything else, come with me on a short journey through AI hype marketing. It's going to get a little bit crazy, but bear with me. It all starts with a dramatic title slide. AI will change everything. Now that's got your attention. And then next you hear a charismatic speaker talk about the next industrial revolution. You think to yourself, wow, this is a big deal. I'd better lock in. And then it levels up, a quantum leap in cognitive automation. This is going to change the way that you work and you live. You really better sit forward and pay attention. Cognitive power unleashed. The technology, the future. I'm hyped. You're hyped. We're hyped. We need to learn more. A new age bursting to life. You can feel the excitement, and it's time. You're ready. You've seen the light. You leave wherever you are. Go home. You open up a computer, open up a chat window, and it says, "Welcome. How can I help you?" Bless the keys that you type on. It's here. You reach forward to the keyboard, ready to change your life, and then, now what? You just stare, feeling maybe a little let down or frustrated, a little scared. Many of you know the feeling that I'm describing. I have certainly felt this before. I very intentionally titled this presentation, No PhD Required, A Practical Guide to AI in the Workplace. This isn't a presentation about how important AI is. It's about how you, a normal human being with a role in state government, can find value in AI. My goal is to share with you the lessons that I've learned over the last 2 years working in this space in order to help you in your journey. And trust me, you don't need a PhD in this stuff. All it takes is a few ideas and a few hours of practice. Are you ready? Let's jump in. So let's come back to this somewhat depressing moment, this now what instance. This idea, this moment, it's more common than you would think. But why? Well, in my experience, the root comes down to how AI gets talked about. Frequently, in various media sources, AI is celebrated for what it is, for what it represents, for the technology or the potential or the excitement. But this is an incomplete picture. And if you step back and think about it, it's actually a little bit strange. To illustrate what I'm talking about, imagine with me a world where we treated hammers in a similar fashion to how we treat AI. One day, you decide that you need to hang up this lovely piece of wall art that we see in this picture. So, you grab your wallet, your keys, you leave for the hardware store. You arrive at the hardware store, and it's hammer fever everywhere. There's doorknobs that are driven by AI. There's cookware that uses hammers. There's flashlights, hammers that have light bulbs in them, locks and keys. You even see a poster somewhere celebrating the exciting release of Hammer version 4.5 Turbo. Of course, this is a silly, very hypothetical example. But what's wrong here? What's missing? Other than the fact that this isn't clearly an AI-generated image. The problem with that scenario is that we forgot why we came. We didn't go to the hardware store to experience the majesty of hammers. We came with a purpose. The hammer that you bought so long ago is part of a solution to a problem. It is not itself as valuable as it is in the context that you find it. This is the important part that gets left out of these AI hype marketing experiences. It is that AI is special because of the problems that it can solve. And this idea leads to the most important takeaway from my presentation. It is this: you will find way more value interacting with AI by taking a problem-first mentality. This is the light that I hope to help you see. First, start with the problem, and then think about whether AI is an appropriate and relevant solution to that problem. Going back to the hammer analogy, you don't buy a hammer because you're excited about hammers and then find random things to pin to the wall. The order here is key. First the problem and then the solution. Now, it's easy. You may sit here listening to this thinking, well, yeah, of course, that's obvious. But it's incredible how quickly we get distracted. And in reality, how difficult this process can be. Identifying the problems that we have first sometimes is not as obvious. So, one of the first things that I would highly recommend that you do to begin your journey with AI is to take a personal problem inventory. Start with the challenges that you face in your role. Now, this could look like a lot of things. This is anything that causes friction in your role, regular pain points, anything that's tedious or repetitive, issues caused by knowledge gaps or transferring information between teams, bottlenecks, anything really that adds friction, like I said, to what you do. Now, this is difficult. We often don't take this type of personal problem inventory, and so it's going to feel uncomfortable. And the good news that I have for you is that that is a pain point. That itself, this task is a pain point that AI can help you with. And that's the first AI use case that I want to talk through with you in this presentation. So, brainstorming problems with AI is one of my favorite ways to interact with AI. And so I want to walk you through in some fairly precise detail how I would go about this conversation. Now, the screenshots that I use here are going to use Microsoft Copilot, but any approved chat platform can work for this. You just need basic chat functionality. You open up a window, it says, "Welcome, how can I help you?" And the first thing that you need to do is prepare your initial message. And for me, the first message that I type is going to need three things. The first one is the objective, and this is both the goal and the context that it's taking place in. So for this instance, I want you to help me take inventory of the challenges in my role. Ultimately, this will be used to find areas to apply AI. Now, writing down the objective is important, but don't hit the enter key yet. We're going to combine all three items all together into one singular prompt. The second item that I like to include in these first messages is the background. This is the context. In this case, my role is, common tasks of mine include, whatever it looks like. When you're writing these types of descriptions, err on the side of being too descriptive. AI is pretty good at ignoring excess details that you provide, but what it can't do is fill in the gaps when you haven't given it anything to work with. The last item is the conversation style. Now, this is a little bit of secret sauce. Explaining how you want the conversation to go is almost as important as explaining what the purpose of it is. Think of it like this. Sometimes, when I'm having a conversation with my wife and she's describing difficult challenges that she's facing, sometimes she wants solutions to her problems, and sometimes she wants sympathy. And it really helps all of us when that desire for solutions or sympathy is described up front. The conversation goes better for all of us. Now, I jest, but it's true. This idea of describing the type of conversation that you want is important because it's not always obvious just based on the context of the conversation itself. So I usually include something that looks like this. I want this to be an iterative conversation. You should ask me questions throughout, and we should start high level and then get even more granular. All right, we're going to type all three of these elements out, put them into one prompt, and then we'll hit the enter key. The AI response is going to come back. It's going to look something like this. Now, this is a lot of text. We're not going to read this for this example, but what we can do is break this into a few fundamental parts. The answers that you get from the AI are going to be a little bit different every time and from everybody else. But there are some major things to look out for that will be common across almost all responses. The first one is a plan for how the conversation is going to go. This I find very reasonable. First, it's going to map out major categories of your role, and then for each category, it'll identify pain points. Seems like a logical way to go about this personal problem inventory process, let's say. But suppose that I was actually not happy with what this plan looked like. Say that that third point about prioritizing where things go was moving in the wrong direction. Well, one option that I could have is to immediately push back, to ignore everything else in the response and just identify that this plan is moving in a direction that I'm not happy with. So something like, please do not discuss ways AI could help in this conversation. I only want to identify pain points. This type of feedback is extremely important because it keeps the conversation itself relevant. If you entertain a conversation for long enough without giving feedback, you may find yourself lost in the weeds, not talking at all about the thing that you originally sat down to talk about. So I highly recommend structuring your conversation in a way so that it gives you opportunities to interject and add feedback so that the conversation stays as relevant as possible. Now, for this demonstration, I'm actually fine with this plan, so we're going to continue without offering any changes and take a look at the next items that it comes back with, which are questions. And here there were a couple. Sometimes there will be several, sometimes there will be just one, but this is really good. This is exactly what we asked the AI to provide when we described that we wanted to have an iterative conversation style. Now, however you want to respond, whether you want to respond in bulk or go one question at a time, you're more than free to. The AI can handle many different types of conversation styles. You can fine tune it and give that direction as you're typing as well, all in one response. But in addition to the questions that it gives are these relevant suggestions. Now, these are really, really helpful because even if they're not directly relevant, even if the suggestions are rather bland and generic, by simply reading them, I often find myself having my memory jogged so that I can think of other things that I should have brought up previously. Add those details as you remember them into the chat as you go. The more information you provide, the more pattern recognition the AI model is capable of latching onto, the higher quality results you're going to get. So, looking at the questions and the suggestions, making any feedback on the direction of the conversation, we can now type out an answer and hit enter. And the AI is going to respond to you in turn, giving you answers and more questions, some suggestions. You're going to reply to those with answers and context and guidance, and you'll keep going over and over until you're satisfied. I mentioned this previously, but don't get lost in the weeds. It's important while you go through the turns in your conversation that you take a step back and make sure that it is moving towards the objective that you want. It's very easy and very common to get caught up in side roads or rabbit holes. It's easy for brainstorming to get stuck on specific topics that maybe do or don't need as much detail. And it's up to you, the one steering this conversational car, to decide whether something is worth even discussing about. If so, if, for instance, this conversation gets stuck on, say, specific technologies, rather than talking about the problems in your role, then correct the AI. Indicate an answer to the question and then, hey, this is not going to work if we keep talking about this. Let's move the conversation in this direction. And the AI is very responsive to that. So, a few more things. A couple of additional tips. First is role prompting. Role prompting is the practice of adding a conversation starter that sounds something like, you are an expert in XYZ topic with 25 years of experience. Those types of leading prompts were very important in the early days of model interactions, but they're not as necessary these days. Now, that's not to say that they're not a helpful tool. They still very much are. But these days, models are sophisticated enough that they don't require this type of prompting in order to give effective answers. So use them when you need them is the tip here. Second, use AI to help you use AI. This is a lot to take in, especially if you've never done this before. Prompting, walking through a structured process, there's a lot here. And the reality is that this information is not new or novel, but it might be new or novel to you. The AI can help you through that process. So if at any point you're thinking to yourself, man, I don't remember what I'm supposed to do at this step, you can have the AI walk you through that process. You can have the AI take a look at a prompt that you've written and explain to it what your intention is and ask it for feedback on that prompt itself. This is an extremely helpful exercise as you are learning how to interact with AI, what things are and aren't important to talk about. Now, the final tip that I have is about restarting conversations. When you're having a very long conversation, you may discover that the AI forgets instructions. All AI models have a limited amount of memory, so to speak. And as a conversation gets longer and longer, that memory fills up. At some point, the quality of its responses are going to start to drop off, and the ability to remember all detailed instructions or all the information in a conversation will start to degrade. That is a sign that your AI conversation has gotten too long. One way to deal with that is to have the AI write a handoff summary, a document that basically explains what the objectives are and what the current status is of the conversation. It will generate that output, you will copy it, you will open a new chat, paste that in, and then continue the conversation with a fresh, much smaller conversation history. In this process, you are probably going to lose a little bit of information. However, it is worth taking a few moments to clarify details again to keep the overall quality of your AI responses high. So I highly recommend doing this if you find yourself in extremely long conversations with the AI. The final tip that I have with you, it's a bonus tip actually, is to take a look at feasibility. Now, nothing formal, but utilizing AI in various ways has with it a bunch of hidden costs and or requirements. It isn't just the AI capabilities that are required. It also includes things like the technical skills that your users or your staff or developers that are needed, the timeline and how urgent your need is, as well as the need for additional infrastructure. These things get talked about, but it's easy to forget them when you are in the middle of brainstorming. Use this as a bit of a filter to help you narrow down on projects with more low-hanging fruit that you will be able to see higher returns on in the short term. And when the time comes for longer-term AI-related projects, be sure to go through this process and cover all of your bases, not just the AI capabilities. All right. We've talked about quite a bit so far. Let's take a step back and explain how AI is like making pickles. Bear with me here. The way that you make pickles is by assembling the ingredients, which are mainly cucumbers, water, salt, and vinegar, and then submerging them and mixing them all together. But there's a secret ingredient here, which is time. You can't make pickles by simply dipping cucumbers in this nasty seawater mix. You have to let them sit there. It takes a lot of time. It takes a few days, in fact, of constant submersion. This is a really good analogy for what it's like to learn how to use AI. Trainings, tutorials, day-to-day presentations, they're all very important ingredients. But at the end of the day, you have to get in and sit in it. You just have to use it. If you stay immersed, it will sink in. So be patient with yourself. As you stay engaged, you will eventually become an AI savvy pickle, which I'm sure is your dream. So, jumping back to the list of challenges from brainstorming. Now we have a list of things that are interesting candidates for using AI and incorporating it into the way that we work. But now what? How do we actually turn this list of challenges into ideas? How do we turn pain points into plans? Now, the reality is that that's going to look different every time. But the best way that I think to learn is to see examples. So the remainder of this presentation that I have for you is going over examples of real use cases here at the state and how those turned into value from an AI solution. Now, before we actually do, a couple of disclaimers. First, AI sandboxes are a term that we use to describe AI environments that are set up for MPH to find use cases. They're only intended for testing and exploration of use cases. They're not formal products that MPH has to offer. The second one are custom tools that I mentioned are also not official offerings from MPH. MPH does a lot of testing and development work to understand the capabilities and risks associated with AI. The things that I discuss are intended to help explore what's possible and to inspire you. They're not, these examples aren't endorsements by MPH. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's jump into the first pain point, which is revising tone and wording in emails. This is a use case that hits home for me. The more important the email is, or the more people that it's going to go out to, the more that I struggle to figure out exactly how to write it. And it is annoying how long it can take. I really like to use AI to go faster through this process. Now, importantly, it's not about having the AI write the emails for me. It's about shortcutting the tedious process of figuring out the exact right wording. And I like to use the brainstorming pattern. So the exact same process that we went through to identify use cases and issues that we face in our roles, we can use the same thing. You first start out with a prompt that describes the objective, the background, and the conversation style that you want to have. So in this case, you explain, I want to draft an email to an important client or to whoever my role is, and this message should communicate. And then I tend to prefer this iterative conversation style. So that's also an element that I will add to this prompt. So it all starts with the same elements. And the same process will continue. The AI will give you a draft or an outline. You will give it feedback, answer questions, and you're going to iterate with it until you are happy, or at least until you're happy to make manual edits. And that's really important. I find that AI rarely delivers a completely 100% satisfactory final product. But what it can do is take you 90% of the way there. By making sure that you have the final word, you make sure that the tone coming out of your emails or your messages or communications or whatever you're drafting sounds a lot more human. So a few suggestions that I have to make this process go a little bit easier. The first one, which isn't exactly a suggestion or a requirement, but it is to start with your own draft rather than having the AI come up with what you'll say from scratch. Now, this does two things for you. The first one, like I mentioned, is it helps make your draft sound more natural. The more of you the AI can work with, and the more of you your readers hear after you push the send button, the more human it's going to sound. But this also, more importantly, requires you to figure out what you want to say. At the end of the day, the AI can't read your mind. It doesn't know what message you're trying to send or all of the context or the tone exactly that you're trying to strike. By writing your own first draft, even if it's poorly written, what you do is answer those questions that the AI can't answer for you. Questions about what do you want to say. And that's a really helpful practice when using AI for drafting. The other thing, and I will reemphasize this, is to scrutinize every single generated word. Check the facts and the assumptions that it's making. The AI does make mistakes sometimes. It does happen. You don't have to look far to find embarrassing examples of high-profile individuals submitting very important documents that clearly have AI traces in it. Things such as at the beginning saying, here is a comprehensive document that explains blah, 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 or an ending that says, would you like me to continue or refine this? Those types of things are embarrassing. So consider this your official warning. It can happen to you. Don't ignore this warning sign. Read every word before you send it. Don't take shortcuts. That's how you get bit. Okay? Lovely. Now, moving on to the next use case. This is rubric-based proposal evaluations. In other words, evaluating documents using a rubric. Now, I used a project proposal here as the example, but truthfully, this could apply to anything where you're just cross-referencing documents with some fixed set of criteria. And the core of this technique is sometimes called prompt engineering. So what is prompt engineering? Prompt engineering is essentially the practice of working on a prompt before submitting it. Now, we did that a little bit with our previous examples with brainstorming, where we wrote all the things that we wanted all together and then submitted the prompt. Structured prompting is effectively anytime you do this in any form, big or small. But for the sake of this conversation, I want to describe something more narrow. So instead of calling it prompt engineering, I want to introduce the term structured prompting, which is basically kind of a supercharged prompt engineering. The idea is this: fixed role within a workflow. That is how the AI, you should think of the AI operating in a structured prompting scenario. There are inputs, there are outputs, and there is a prompt that provides instructions to go in between. Now, you'll notice that there is no cycle here. There's no iteration like brainstorming. This is one task, one objective that the AI has to do that it will do repeatedly. So, for example, this project proposal. The inputs could be the proposal document itself, as well as supplementary things like a budget summary. The outputs that we're interested in seeing are condensed summary reports and perhaps some data that's been extracted into a table to compare other projects together. And the prompting instructions would be how you want those things to be mapped. So importantly, there is not necessarily an opportunity for a human being to have a chat. This is not an example of a chat. Structured prompting is a one-shot prompting sort of situation. The inputs and the outputs are obviously important to think about, but the most difficult part about a structured prompting exercise is actually creating the prompt. With brainstorming, you wrote the prompts on the fly. You were having a conversation with the AI. But with a structured prompting project, that prompt does all the heavy lifting, and it can take hours, a week, even longer to develop the prompt itself, to make sure that it covers all of the edge cases. So what gets included in a structured prompt? Well, there's several things. Few universal categories, though, are one, a broad overview of the task. Give it context. Always give it context. The more detail, the better. The second thing is a description of the inputs. This is describing what the AI should expect those inputs to look like, how many of them, what their purposes are, what parts should and shouldn't be paid attention to, typical layout, key phrases, formatting quirks, etc. The next item to include are output instructions. Now, this is probably the hardest part because, again, it requires you, the project executor, to decide what the output actually is that you're interested in. Is it a report? Do you want specific layouts or formatting? Do you want a specific length? Do you want anything? Those types of instructions can be very difficult because you need to be very detailed, and the AI will inevitably infer something that you didn't mean, and you'll have to iterate and correct on it, which is a normal part of this workflow. The final thing to include are what I've labeled resources. That would be anything that the AI needs to be aware of, definitions, guidelines, data tables that need to be present, basically inputs that need to be repeated across every single iteration of a structured prompts project. These four things all together all get written up into one enormous document. For our specific example of reviewing project proposals, I might consider the inputs being key proposal elements. So for this example, I'm not envisioning a specific form that gets filled out. Rather, they can look like anything. So the inputs that the AI should be aware of are specific parts, such as the project description, maybe the domain that it occupies, whatever it looks like. And then for outputs, perhaps we're interested in a data table and maybe a couple of different risk assessments, the criterion for them, as well as the formatting for that report. Now, the final thing that I'll mention here is just for the sake of convenience, I would recommend that you save your proposal structured prompt, or really any structured prompt for that matter, in a plain text file by using something like Notepad rather than using a Word document. And the short answer reason for that is that text, plain text rather than Word-based text is easier for the AI to process, consumes less tokens when you upload it, and it's generally easier to maintain and share with other people. But that's not a huge item. Okay, so we've got this structured prompt written together. Now to actually use it and actually produce these summary reports based on the inputted documents, we're going to follow a workflow that looks something like this. First, you're going to open up your chat window. You're going to upload your documents, and then you're going to paste your prompt into the chat window. And then you're going to hit enter, and out will pop the report, the extracted data, whatever it is, at which point you can copy it, paste it out somewhere else, and go and run with it from there. Now, you can build automated routing logic into all of these parts so that you actually don't have to touch any of it except for perhaps the input stage. But that adds a whole nother layer of developmental complexity, and that's a step beyond what I sort of envision here. This workflow you can do with a basic chatbot. The fancy bells and whistles with automated routing is interesting, but I would highly recommend that you start with this and then look at more complicated infrastructure later once you know what the core items and pieces of data are that you need to consider. So a final note about this example is to remember the pickles. This idea of decomposing a whole workflow into inputs, instructions, and outputs isn't exactly commonplace for a lot of roles or for a lot of agencies. In addition, this whole practice of being highly verbose in one single prompt instead of having a conversation, it's very different from the natural language strategy of brainstorming. So I will remind you, you don't have to have a PhD in this. You just have to sit in it. It becomes more natural as you practice, as you spend time actually doing it. So don't beat yourself up if it's not super obvious or clicking super easily right now. That's okay. It takes time. The last example, which is very exciting, is categorizing a contract archive. This example actually comes from our friends at the Department of Administration, or IDOA, and has been a pilot for MPH in a lot of ways. So there's a little bit more background to understand this exact project. So let's dive into that first. It begins at the Indiana Transparency Portal, or the ITP, specifically the section dedicated to procurement contracts. After a contract has been awarded, a signed document is uploaded to the transparency portal by IDOA. Now, this archive is very large. There's about 200,000 contract documents in total. That includes both base contract documents as well as amendments for extensions or additional services. About a year ago, IDOA reached out to MPH asking for help. They needed to extract data from every single contract. And that would be things like the presence of specific language, inferring the spending category based on the type of thing being procured, as well as validating the metadata found on the Transparency Portal website itself. There were something like 20 or 30 of these data elements that they were hoping to extract from every single contract that was available. But several obstacles, several issues here. The big one is that human review would take too long. They estimated that it would take 10 years of review for one full-time employee to complete this task. And that's just with the current set of contracts that are present on the portal today. That's not including new ones that surely are coming down the pipeline and will continue to come down. So they approached us to see if AI could help with this process. So breaking this down, they had a concrete set of inputs, the contract documents, and a defined set of outputs, data elements, that they could describe and provide nuanced explanations about in a text file. In other words, they came to us with a textbook case of structured prompting. The procurement team met with us regularly to draft the prompt. Their expertise was important for teaching the AI what to expect and what to ignore. These contracts tended to follow the same formatting, but varied considering the archive contains contracts that are many decades old. It took a couple of weeks, and we had to iterate a lot with subject matter experts over at IDOA in order to go through the variety of edge cases. But eventually, we got it all there. We executed this workflow on every single contract, spitting out extracted data for each one, and compiled it into a spreadsheet that looks something like this. Each row represented the single contract ID. Each column represented a field or a variable that was extracted from the document itself. I really liked the way that one of our IDOA colleagues put it. They said, "This is great because it converts a sea of unstructured documents into a structured data source. It changes the way that we need to think about our data." That idea, as we've explained this to several other folks in meetings in the preceding months, has resonated with a lot of people. And maybe this sparks an idea for you as well, a way that you can use structured prompting to get value out of the information that you have. Now, I should mention that there were some additional obstacles that were related to technology that came up in regards to this one. These two mainly. The first one, scanned documents being not AI readable. Old scans that are actually images rather than digital native text documents that just then become converted into PDF files can't be read by standard AI algorithms. So we had to use something called optical character recognition software. This is computer vision that helps do that extraction. Not a deal breaker, but something that had to be dealt with. In addition, actually running this workflow 200,000 times, once for each contract, wasn't feasible, even despite the time savings. So we had code-based automation written by in-house developers, and we did that through the AI sandbox and using some bulk features. Again, not deal breakers, but additional feasibility factors that needed to be considered. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about how these specific items were handled, but instead what I'm going to recommend is that you go and check out the slides by my coworker in this session here, Your Documents Are Holding Out on You by Theodore Stumpf. Many of the obstacles that we encountered in this project led to the creation of some internal tools, and that was what he discussed in this presentation. You can find his slides online at the Day-to-Day website. But I do bring these issues up to highlight again their impact on feasibility. It isn't just AI capability, it's cost, timeline, staff needs, infrastructure, etc. None of these are deal breakers, but it's important to be upfront and honest about the cost benefits before you get 6 months into a project that somebody thought was going to take a few days. It took a few months for us, but it was ultimately worth it for the time savings and the freed up capacity on the IDOA side of things to do this implementation. And it was extremely worthwhile for us at MPH to spend our time learning and developing and identifying various like security concerns, security risk protocols, and other things that were just very helpful to have a real heavy-duty use case at our fingertips. All right. So folks, that's all I have to share. I appreciate you listening. We've talked about a lot, so I want to close out with a few of the most important takeaways. First, each use case that we discussed started with a problem. If you want to give AI a meaningful shot, this is the starting place. Identify the problems and then determine whether AI is an appropriate solution. This is the most practical guidance that I can give. And finally, a word of encouragement. You, a human being with a role in state government, can learn to use AI effectively. You don't need to have a PhD in the topic. You just need the right ingredients and a little patience. You just have to sit in it. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed Day-to-Day 2026 from the Management Performance Hub. Additional resources on state AI policy, as well as other publications regarding AI, can be found here. Thank you very much.